In a packed courtroom, a humble boy and his dog are mocked by a ruthless millionaire. But when the judge spots a hidden secret in the boy's notes, the truth starts to turn the tide. Amid forgotten evidence, a web of fraud is exposed, and the fate of an entire community will depend on a boy's courage and a dog's loyalty. Watch until the end. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. The murmur in the Oak Ridge County Courthouse subsided abruptly when 12-year-old Ethan Miller walked through the massive oak doors with his German Shepherd Scout by his side. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, a mixture of astonishment and disdain painting the faces of the well-dressed attendees. In the front row, surrounded by a team of impeccably groomed lawyers, sat Harrison Montgomery, the wealthiest man in 3 counties and owner of Montgomery Developments, a real estate empire that stretched across the southeastern United States. Judge William Peterson, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair and 30 years on the bench, adjusted his glasses and peered down at the boy. "Young man, dogs are not permitted in my courtroom unless they're service animals." "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice barely audible, "Scout he's all I have left of my family. I promise he won't make a sound." Before the judge could respond, Montgomery's lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Victoria Winters, stood up. "Your Honor, this is precisely the kind of emotional manipulation we've come to expect. The defendant is attempting to garner sympathy rather than address the serious charges of trespassing and property damage." The judge sighed. "Very well. The dog can stay, but at the first disturbance, he'll be removed." He nodded to Ethan. "Where is your legal representation, son?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his too large second-hand suit. "I couldn't afford a lawyer, Your Honor. My grandmother's medical bills took everything we had." A whisper rippled through the courtroom. In the small town of Oak Ridge, Georgia, everyone knew about Ethan's situation. After losing his parents in an accident 3 years ago, he'd been raised by his grandmother, Martha Miller, a kindly woman whose modest pension barely covered their needs. They lived in a small cottage on the edge of town, and Ethan had become known for his exceptional intelligence, teaching himself advanced mathematics and science from library books. Judge Peterson frowned. "The court can appoint—" "That won't be necessary, Your Honor," Ethan interrupted politely. "I've been studying law books from the public library. I believe I can represent myself." A few chuckles echoed around the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's stern gaze. "Mr. Montgomery, would you care to explain the nature of your complaint against this young man?" Harrison Montgomery rose slowly, his tall frame imposing in a tailored charcoal suit. At 62, he had the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. His silver hair was immaculately styled, and his cold blue eyes regarded Ethan with open contempt. "Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, this boy and his dog deliberately trespassed on my property, a valuable development site on the east side of town. They damaged security fencing, ignored clear no trespassing signs, and interfered with an active construction zone. This reckless behavior not only constitutes criminal trespass, but exposed my company to significant liability." Montgomery's voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of a responsible businessman concerned with public safety. Only those who knew him well would recognize the undercurrent of practiced charm that had helped him build his empire. Furthermore, he continued, "When confronted by security, the boy was belligerent and refused to leave. I have no choice but to seek damages and a restraining order to prevent future incidents." Judge Peterson turned to Ethan. "That's a serious allegation, son. How do you respond?" Ethan took a deep breath, Scout pressing reassuringly against his leg. "Your Honor, I did enter Mr. Montgomery's property, but not for the reasons he states. My dog and I were walking past the site when Scout began barking and pulling toward the fenced area. He wouldn't stop, and that's when I heard it. a faint call for help. The boy's voice grew stronger as he continued. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, a 78-year-old resident of Oak Ridge, had fallen into an abandoned foundation pit on the property. She'd been missing for nearly 2 days, was severely dehydrated, and had a broken ankle. If Scout hadn't sensed her presence, and if we hadn't entered that property, Mrs. Jenkins might not have survived another night. Montgomery scoffed loudly. Pure fabrication, Your Honor. There was no record of anyone on that property. We conduct daily security sweeps. Mrs. Jenkins is here today, Ethan said quietly, gesturing to an elderly woman sitting in the back of the courtroom, supported by a walking cane and accompanied by her daughter. She can testify to what happened. Before Mrs. Jenkins could be called, Victoria Winters rose again. Your Honor, even if this story were true, it doesn't excuse trespassing. The boy should have called emergency services rather than taking matters into his own hands. And it certainly doesn't explain why he returned to the property multiple times afterward, as our security cameras show. A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's face flushed, but he remained composed. I returned because something didn't seem right. The construction site was supposed to be building affordable housing for seniors. That's what all the town meetings and approved permits said. But the foundations I saw were for much larger structures. Montgomery laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Now the boy fancies himself a building inspector? Your Honor, this is absurd. My company has all the necessary permits, which were properly filed with the county clerk's office. Indeed, Victoria Winters added smoothly, and we've included copies of all relevant documentation in our filing. She gestured to a thick binder on the desk before her. Judge Peterson rubbed his temples. Mr. Miller, trespassing is a serious offense, regardless of your intentions. Do you have any evidence to support your claims about improper construction? Ethan hesitated, then reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a folder filled with hand-drawn diagrams and notes. I've been studying architectural design and civil engineering on my own, Your Honor. The foundations at the site don't match what was shown in the public plans. They're deeper and configured differently. Victoria Winters rolled her eyes dramatically. Your Honor, we're expected to take the word of a child who's playing at being an engineer. This is a waste of the court's time. But something in Ethan's earnest expression gave the judge pause. I think we need to examine these allegations more carefully. Ms. Winters, I'd like to see the official plans for the Montgomery Senior Living project. And Mr. Montgomery, I want a full accounting of the current state of construction. Montgomery's confident smile faltered slightly. Of course, Your Honor, though I must protest this diversion from the matter at hand. The boy's unlawful trespass. Noted, the judge replied dryly. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9. Mr. Miller, I strongly suggest you reconsider court-appointed counsel. As the courtroom began to empty, Harrison Montgomery approached Ethan, looming over the boy. You're making a serious mistake, he said quietly, his voice like silk over steel. A smart boy like you should know better than to challenge someone with my resources. Drop this nonsense now, and perhaps I'll be lenient. Scout growled softly, and Ethan placed a calming hand on the dog's head. Mrs. Jenkins could have died on your property, Mr. Montgomery, and I think there's more going on at that construction site than you're admitting. Montgomery's smile never reached his eyes. Be careful, boy. In my experience, smart children who don't know their place often find themselves in unfortunate circumstances. As Montgomery turned to leave, followed by his entourage of lawyers, Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Eleanor Jenkins, her kind face creased with concern. That man has the whole town in his pocket, she whispered. The things I saw while I was trapped on that property. I'm afraid for you, Ethan. What did you see, Mrs. Jenkins? Ethan asked. The elderly woman glanced nervously at Montgomery's retreating back. Not here. Come by my house this evening. There are things you should know. Things about those construction plans and about the land they're building on. As Ethan and Scout left the courthouse, they were met by a small crowd of townspeople, some supportive, others skeptical. Among them was Sarah Thompson, the local librarian who had helped nurture Ethan's voracious appetite for knowledge over the years. "Are you sure you know what you're doing, Ethan?" she asked gently. "Harrison Montgomery isn't someone to cross lightly. He's ruined people for far less." Ethan looked up at the courthouse steps, where Montgomery was giving a statement to the local press, his perfect smile flashing in the afternoon. "Son, I don't have a choice, Miss Thompson. This isn't just about me or Mrs. Jenkins anymore. There's something wrong with that construction site, and I think it affects the whole town." As they walked home to check on his grandmother, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple trespassing case. Scout seemed to sense his unease, staying close to his side, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm that would match the turmoil brewing in the small town of Oak Ridge. Following morning, the courthouse was packed. Word had spread through Oak Ridge about the confrontation between young Ethan Miller and Harrison Montgomery, drawing curious townsfolk eager to witness the David and Goliath battle. Ethan arrived. Early, Scout faithfully at his side, carrying a battered leather messenger bag filled with papers and notebooks. As they made their way to their designated table, Ethan spotted Mrs. Jenkins sitting with her daughter, offering him an encouraging smile. Several rows behind them sat his grandmother, Martha Miller, looking frail but determined, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Peterson," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom fell silent as the judge entered and took his seat. "Before we proceed," Judge Peterson began, "I want to address something. Mr. Miller, I've appointed Laura Chen as your legal advisor. She won't represent you officially, as you've chosen to represent yourself, but she can guide you through procedures and legal matters." A young Asian American woman in a navy suit approached Ethan's table and sat beside him. "I'm here to help," she whispered, "but I understand you want to handle this yourself." Ethan nodded gratefully as Judge Peterson continued. "Now, Ms. Winters, do you have the documentation I requested?" Victoria Winters approached the bench with a confident stride, presenting a folder of blueprints and permits. "Everything is in order, Your Honor. All plans were approved by the County Zoning Board 6 months ago." The judge examined the documents carefully before passing them to Laura Chen, who in turn showed them to Ethan. The boy studied the plans with intensity, his brow furrowing as he compared them to his own notes. "Your Honor," Ethan said, rising from his seat, "may I approach the bench?" Judge Peterson nodded, and Ethan walked forward, Scout remaining obediently by their table. He carefully laid out his hand-drawn diagrams beside the official blueprints. "These official plans show a 3-story building with 48 apartments designed for senior living," Ethan explained, his voice steady, despite Montgomery's intimidating stare from across the room. "But the foundations I observed don't match these specifications. They're designed for a structure at least twice this size, with deeper footings and different load-bearing walls." Montgomery cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the boy clearly has no understanding of construction. Preliminary work often appears different from final plans. That's why I went to the library and studied architectural design and foundation engineering," Ethan replied, pulling out several books with carefully placed bookmarks. "I compared the standard requirements for different types of buildings. The foundations at Mr. Montgomery's site are consistent with luxury condominiums, not affordable senior housing." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Peterson studied the diagrams more carefully. "Mr. Montgomery, can you explain this discrepancy?" Before Montgomery could answer, Victoria Winters interjected smoothly. "Your Honor, this is a distraction from the issue at hand. The boy trespassed, regardless of his amateur analysis of our construction methods. I believe they're connected, Ethan insisted. And there's more. Mrs. Jenkins told me something important last night. All eyes turned to Eleanor Jenkins, who struggled to her feet with the help of her cane. Your Honor, when I fell into that pit, I was unconscious for a while. When I came to, I heard men talking nearby. They didn't know I was there, and they were discussing how they had finally secured the whole valley and could triple their investment once the old folks were priced out. Harrison Montgomery laughed dismissively. The fantasies of an elderly woman who was, by her own admission, injured and disoriented. This is becoming ridiculous. Is it? Ethan challenged, his voice stronger now. Because I've been researching the land records for that valley. The property records shown in Mr. Montgomery's permits don't match the county archives. He pulled out several photocopied documents from his bag. These are the original survey maps from 1972, showing that part of that land belongs to the town. As a protected watershed, it was never meant to be developed. Judge Peterson's eyebrows rose as he examined the documents. Ms. Winters, were you aware of this discrepancy? Victoria Winters maintained her composure. Your Honor, land records are often complicated. If there's a question about boundaries, we're happy to have a professional survey conducted. I think that would be wise, the judge agreed. In fact, I'm ordering an independent survey and review of all permits related to this project, to be completed before we proceed further with this case. Harrison Montgomery stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is an outrageous waste of time and resources. My company has invested millions in this development. Delays cost money. So does building on land you don't own, Judge Peterson replied dryly. Court will recess for 1 week while these matters are investigated, and Mr. Montgomery, I advise you to halt construction until this is resolved. As the judge rose to leave, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Montgomery stormed out, barking orders into his cell phone. Ethan remained at the table, organizing his papers, when he felt a hand on his shoulder. You did well in there, Laura Chen said, but you've made a powerful enemy. Montgomery isn't used to being challenged, especially by someone so young. I just want the truth, Ethan replied, scratching Scout behind the ears. Something's not right about this whole situation. And you may be right, Laura acknowledged, but be careful. Men like Montgomery have ways of making problems disappear. Outside the courthouse, Ethan was surprised to find a small crowd waiting. For him, among them was Michael Ramirez, the editor of the Oak Ridge Gazette, the local newspaper. Ethan, can I get a statement from you about today's proceedings? Ramirez asked, notebook poised. Before Ethan could respond, Victoria Winters appeared, smoothly inserting herself between Ethan and the reporter. Mr. Ramirez, Montgomery Developments will be filing a defamation suit if you print unfounded allegations against Mr. Montgomery. Consider yourself warned. Ramirez hesitated, but then squared his shoulders. The people have a right to know what's happening in their town, Ms. Winters. Threats won't stop the free press. As Winters stalked away, Ramirez turned back to Ethan. That was impressive. What you did in there, kid. But watch your back. Montgomery doesn't play fair, and he practically owns this town. Not all of it, came a voice from behind them. Eleanor Jenkins approached, leaning heavily on her cane. Ethan, there's something else I need to show you. Something I found in my husband's papers after he passed. He was the town surveyor for 40 years, and he kept records of everything. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Scout sat at Mrs. Jenkins's kitchen table, surrounded by yellowed maps and documents. Her daughter, Rebecca, served them lemonade as they worked. Dad was meticulous, Rebecca explained. He suspected someone was tampering with the land records years ago, but he could never prove it. He kept his own copies of everything. Ethan carefully compared the official surveys with Mr. Jenkins' private records. These boundaries are completely different, he murmured. According to these original documents, almost half of Montgomery's development is actually on protected watershed land or property that belongs to other people. Mrs. Jenkins nodded grimly. Harrison's father started buying up land in the valley 30 years ago. Whenever someone wouldn't sell, strange things would happen. Tax reassessments, bank loans suddenly called in, mysterious problems with their businesses. And now Harrison is finishing what his father started, Rebecca added. But he didn't count on you and Scout finding my mother, or on you being smart enough to spot the discrepancies. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. I need to show these to Judge Peterson. Mrs. Jenkins exchanged a worried glance with her daughter. Be careful, Ethan. The Montgomerys have always had friends in high places, even in the courthouse. As dusk fell, Ethan and Scout made their way home, the messenger bag now filled with carefully organized evidence. The streets were quiet, most shops already closed for the night. As they passed Montgomery Development's gleaming downtown office, Ethan noticed lights still burning inside and familiar voices carrying through a partially open window. The boy is becoming a problem, Montgomery's distinctive voice drifted out. I want him discredited. Find something, anything, we can use against him. What about his grandmother? Victoria Winters suggested. The old woman's medical bills must be substantial. Perhaps a generous offer might persuade the boy to drop this foolishness. Try it, Montgomery replied. But if that doesn't work, we'll need to take more decisive action. I've waited too long and invested too much to let some orphan and his mutt ruin everything. Ethan backed away slowly, heart pounding. Scout sensed his fear and remained silent, padding softly beside him as they hurried home through darkening streets. Martha Miller was waiting on the porch of their small cottage, worry etched across her face. I was getting concerned, she said, embracing her grandson. The news is all over town about what happened in court. Ethan hugged her tightly. Grandma, I found something important, but it might make things difficult for us. Montgomery isn't just building on the wrong land. I think he's been manipulating property records for years. Martha's eyes hardened. Your grandfather always said there was something shady about the Montgomery's land deals. He lost his construction business, refusing to work for them. She cupped Ethan's face in her weathered hands. You do what's right, no matter how difficult. That's what Millers have always done. That night, as Ethan prepared for bed, he heard a car approaching their house. Scout growled low in his throat, moving to the window. Peering out cautiously, Ethan saw a black SUV with tinted windows parked. Across the street, two men in suits sat inside, watching the house. They're trying to intimidate us, Ethan whispered to Scout, scratching behind the dog's ears to calm him. But we won't let them. He spread Mrs. Jenkins' documents across his bedroom floor, searching for a pattern. Hours passed as he cross-referenced maps, property lines, and permit applications, making careful notes. Gradually, a picture emerged. A systematic scheme of manipulated boundaries, altered surveys, and falsified documents spanning decades. As dawn broke, Ethan finally fell asleep at his desk, Scout vigilant at his feet. In his dreams, he stood in the courthouse while Montgomery laughed from a towering judge's bench. But when he awoke, determination had replaced fear. The truth was hidden in the details, and detail was something Ethan excelled at finding. The black SUV remained outside, its occupants changing shifts. Ethan knew they were sending a message: back off or face the consequences. But as he organized his evidence and prepared for the coming battle, Ethan realized he'd already crossed a line from which there was no returning. Too many people had been hurt by Montgomery's schemes, and someone needed to stand up for them. With Scout by his side and the truth in his hands, Ethan was ready to face whatever came next. The game had only just begun. By the time the court reconvened the following week, Oak Ridge was buzzing with rumors. The black SUV had become a permanent fixture outside the Miller cottage, and anonymous calls had begun harassing Martha et al. Hours. At school, Ethan found himself alternately treated as a hero or a pariah, as children of Montgomery employees were instructed to avoid him. The independent survey ordered by Judge Peterson had been completed, and the results were sealed. Until the hearing. As Ethan entered the courthouse with Scout, he noticed several unfamiliar faces, reporters from Atlanta and Savannah, drawn by whispers of corruption in the small town. Laura Chen met him at the entrance. "Are you ready for this? Montgomery has brought in reinforcements, a senior partner from their Atlanta firm." Ethan nodded, patting his messenger bag. "I found something important in the documents Mrs. Jenkins gave me. I think it changes everything." Inside, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Harrison Montgomery sat with an expanded legal team, his expression coldly confident. Victoria Winters leaned toward him, whispering something that made him smile, smugly. When Judge Peterson entered, the room fell silent. "Before we proceed, I want to address a matter that has come to my attention," he began, his expression grave. "This court has received multiple complaints about intimidation tactics being employed against witnesses in this case. Let me be perfectly clear. Any attempt to interfere with these proceedings will be met with the full force of the law." His gaze swept over Montgomery's table, lingering briefly before moving on. "Now, regarding the independent survey, Mr. Hoffman, please present your findings." A middle-aged man in a conservative suit approached the bench, carrying rolled maps and a thick binder. "Your Honor, our firm conducted a comprehensive survey of the property in question, comparing current conditions with historical records dating back to the original land grants." He unrolled a large map on an easel facing the court. The red lines indicate the boundaries as represented in Montgomery Development's permit applications. The blue lines show the actual legally recorded boundaries according to county records. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as the discrepancy became apparent. Nearly 40% of the development site extended beyond the properly owned land. Furthermore, Hoffman continued, the yellow area represents protected watershed, land that was designated as conservation property in 1985 and is legally prohibited from development. Montgomery leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorneys. The new lawyer from Atlanta rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Thomas Bradford for Montgomery Developments. While we appreciate Mr. Hoffman's diligence, we believe there's a simple explanation. These discrepancies likely result from outdated county records. My client has documentation of properly executed land transfers that may not have been correctly registered." Judge Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Do you have these documents with you, Mr. Bradford? We're in the process of locating them." "Your Honor, some are quite old and may be in storage." Ethan stood, Scout at attention beside him. "Your Honor, if I may." At the judge's nod, he approached and handed over a folder. "These are copies of the original surveys conducted by Edward Jenkins, who served as Oak Ridge County Surveyor from 1962 to 2002. They show the correct boundaries, certified and notarized." He pulled out another document. "And this is a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, stating that 6 months before her husband's passing, Harrison Montgomery's father offered to buy these original surveys for an unusual amount of money. When Mr. Jenkins refused, he was removed from his position on fabricated charges of incompetence." Bradford's professional demeanor faltered momentarily. "Hearsay and unsubstantiated allegations, Your Honor. The boy is clearly reaching for anything to support his trespassing defense." "There's more," Ethan continued undeterred. "I've been researching property transfers in Oak Ridge County for the past 30 years. 16 families who refused to sell to Montgomery Developments subsequently faced tax audits, foreclosures, or other financial hardships that forced them to sell at below-market rates. I've prepared a timeline showing the pattern." He handed another document to the judge, a meticulously prepared chart showing property acquisitions alongside coincidental hardships befalling the previous owners. Judge Peterson studied the chart with growing concern. "Mr. Montgomery, these are serious implications. Do you wish to respond?" Harrison Montgomery finally rose, straightening his Italian silk tie. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The boy has constructed elaborate conspiracy theories to justify his criminal behavior. Yes, my company has acquired properties over the years. That's the nature of real estate development. Some owners faced financial difficulties. That's unfortunately common. To suggest a connection is preposterous." His voice was reasonable, measured, the perfect tone of a wrongfully accused businessman. "As for these survey discrepancies, I'm certain they'll be resolved once our complete records are located. In the meantime, this entire sideshow distracts from the simple fact that this child trespassed on private property and should be held accountable." Before the judge could respond, the courtroom doors opened and Michael Ramirez hurried in, followed by a middle-aged woman Ethan didn't recognize. "Your Honor," Ramirez called out, "I apologize for the interruption, but this is urgent. This is Patricia Dawson, former administrative assistant to William Montgomery, Harrison's father. She has critical information relevant to this case." Montgomery's face darkened. "This is completely inappropriate, Your Honor." Judge Peterson held up his hand. "I'll decide what's appropriate in my courtroom, Mr. Montgomery." He turned to the newcomers. "Mr. Ramirez, Ms. Dawson, approach the bench." After a brief, whispered conference, Judge Peterson addressed the court. "In light of new information, this court will take a short recess. Counsel for both parties, please join me in chambers." When court resumed an hour later, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Judge Peterson's expression was thunderous as he surveyed the room. "Based on sworn testimony and documentation provided by Ms. Dawson, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation," he announced. "Ms. Dawson has provided evidence suggesting systematic corruption, including falsification of land records, bribery of county officials, and intimidation of property owners spanning more than 2 decades. The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations. Montgomery sat rigidly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Furthermore," the judge continued once order was restored, "I am issuing an immediate injunction halting all Montgomery development projects in Oak Ridge County pending full investigation. Mr. Montgomery, you will surrender your passport to the court clerk before leaving the building today." Bradford was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we strenuously object to these extraordinary measures based on unverified allegations. My client is a respected businessman with deep ties to this community." "Your objection is noted," Judge Peterson replied coldly. "But when those allegations include documentation showing your client knowingly built on protected watershed land, falsified permit applications, and potentially endangered the water supply for half the county, I believe caution is warranted." He turned to Ethan. "Mr. Miller, regarding the trespassing charge against you, this court finds that your actions were justified under emergency circumstances to save Mrs. Jenkins' life. Case dismissed." As the proceedings concluded, Ethan found himself surrounded by townsfolk offering congratulations and reporters shouting questions. Through the crowd, he caught Montgomery's eye. The developer's usual mask of civility had slipped, revealing cold hatred beneath. "This isn't over," Montgomery mouthed silently across the room. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Dawson approached Ethan, Scout sniffing her hand curiously before allowing her to pat him. "You're a brave young man," she said quietly. "He worked for William Montgomery for 15 years, always suspecting something wasn't right, but too afraid to speak up. When I saw your story in the paper," she shook her head, "sometimes it takes a child to show adults the right path." "Why did you come forward now?" Ethan asked. Patricia's eyes grew distant. My sister lost her home to the Montgomerys 10 years ago. The stress contributed to her heart attack the following year. When I saw history repeating itself with others, I couldn't stay silent anymore." As they spoke, Victoria Winters emerged from the courthouse, her perfectly composed facade showing cracks for the first time. She paused, considering them, then approached. "You've made a serious mistake today," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Harrison Montgomery isn't a man who forgives or forgets." "Is that a threat, Ms. Winters?" Laura Chen asked, stepping protectively closer to Ethan. Victoria smiled thinly. "Merely an observation. Things have a way of balancing out eventually." She walked away, phone already at her ear. That evening, Martha Miller's small cottage became an impromptu gathering place as neighbors brought dishes of food and offered support. The black SUV had disappeared from their street, but Ethan remained wary, keeping Scout close. Sarah Thompson, the librarian, wrapped Ethan in a warm hug. "I saved every book you asked for," she whispered, "even when people started asking questions about what you were researching. I knew you were onto something important." Michael Ramirez cornered Ethan by the porch swing. "How did you know to dig so deep into those property records? Most adults wouldn't have made those connections." Ethan shrugged. "After my parents passed, books became my escape. I started reading about architecture, then engineering, then property. Law. When something doesn't fit a pattern, I notice." "That's a rare gift," Ramirez replied thoughtfully. "The town owes you more than they realize." As twilight deepened, Judge Peterson made a surprising appearance. He declined to come inside, instead asking Ethan to join him for a brief walk, Scout trotting alongside them. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, as they strolled down the quiet street. Judge Peterson sighed heavily. "The district attorney will investigate. There will likely be charges filed, fraud, corruption, environmental violations, but the Montgomerys have powerful friends and excellent lawyers." He stopped, turning to face Ethan directly. "I need to warn you, son. This kind of case can drag on for years. Montgomery will use every legal maneuver to delay and distract. He'll try to wear down witnesses, discredit evidence, and shift blame to subordinates." "So he might get away with it?" Ethan asked, dismayed. "Not completely," the judge assured him, "but these battles are rarely clean or quick. The important thing is that you've brought the truth to light. The development has been stopped, and people are aware now." As they returned to the cottage, the judge added, "You should be proud of what you've accomplished. Not many adults would have shown your courage or perseverance." After the guests departed, Martha sat with Ethan on the porch swing, Scout lying at their feet. The night was peaceful, fireflies dancing in the garden. "Your parents would be so proud," she said softly, "standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. That's the mark of a good person." Ethan leaned against her shoulder. "I'm worried about what Montgomery might do next." Judge Peterson said this could take years. Martha nodded. "Most likely. But remember, you've already won the most important victory. You showed the truth to everyone, and now you're not standing alone anymore." Inside the house, the phone rang. Martha answered it, her expression changing as she listened. When she returned to the porch, her face was troubled. That was Rebecca Jenkins. Someone broke into her mother's house tonight. They took all of Edward's old surveys and maps, everything except the copies we already submitted to the court. Ethan sat up straight. "Did they call the police?" "Yes, but—" Martha hesitated. "The officer who responded was Kevin Thomas. His brother works for Montgomery Construction." The implications hung in the air between them. Scout raised his head, ears perked as if sensing their unease. "We need to be careful," Ethan said finally. "Montgomery's desperate now, which makes him dangerous." Later that night, as Ethan prepared for bed, he noticed Scout acting strangely, pacing and whining at the bedroom window. Looking out, he saw nothing unusual on their quiet street, but Scout's agitation continued. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, scratching the dog's ears. "What do you sense?" Following Scout's gaze, Ethan noticed a faint glow in the distance, in the direction of the disputed construction site. Making a quick decision, he dressed quietly and slipped downstairs, Scout at his heels. "Grandma," he called softly to Martha, who was reading in the living room. "Scout and I are going to check something. If we're not back in an hour, call Judge Peterson, not the police." Martha frowned, with concern. "Ethan, it's not safe. We'll be careful," he promised, "and Scout will protect me." Against her better judgment, Martha nodded. "1 hour, then I'm calling for help." The night was clear and cool as Ethan and Scout made their way through back streets and wooded shortcuts, avoiding main roads. As they approached the construction site, the glow resolved into portable floodlights, illuminating the area. From the cover of trees, Ethan watched in shock as workers operated heavy machinery, systematically destroying the foundations and removing evidence of the construction that had taken place. Men in suits supervised the operation, among them Victoria Winters, directing activities with crisp efficiency. Ethan ducked lower as a familiar figure emerged from a luxury sedan. Harrison Montgomery himself, surveying the destruction with satisfaction. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the cold calculation in his expression. "They're removing the evidence," Ethan whispered to Scout. "We need proof." Slowly, carefully, he pulled out his phone and began recording the scene, zooming in to capture faces and the deliberate destruction. As he filmed, Scout suddenly stiffened beside him, a low growl building in his throat. Turning, Ethan found himself face to face with one of Montgomery's security guards, a hulking man with cold eyes. "Well, well," the man said with a dangerous smile. "Looks like we have a spy." "Mr. Montgomery," the security guard called out, gripping Ethan's arm tightly. "Look what I found sneaking around." Scout's growl deepened, his posture shifting into a protective stance. Ethan whispered a command, and the dog held his position, though his eyes never left the guard's hand on his master's arm. Floodlights swung in their direction as Harrison Montgomery strode toward them, Victoria Winters close behind. In the harsh, artificial light, Montgomery's face looked almost skeletal, stripped of its usual charm. "Twice now you've trespassed on my property," he said coldly. "This time there's no convenient old lady to rescue, is there?" Ethan struggled to keep his voice steady. "This isn't your property, Mr. Montgomery, and destroying evidence won't change that." Montgomery laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the night air. "Evidence? I'm simply clearing a failed project site, perfectly legal." "Not according to the court order," Ethan replied. "Judge Peterson ordered all work stopped pending investigation." Victoria Winters stepped forward. "Judge Peterson's order applies to construction, not deconstruction, a subtle but important legal distinction." "And who's going to stop us?" Montgomery asked, gesturing around the empty site. "You? Your mutt? Face it, boy, you're in way over your head." The security guard tightened his grip, making Ethan wince. "What should I do with him, sir?" Montgomery considered for a moment. "Bring him to my trailer. We need to have a proper conversation about his future in Oak Ridge." His eyes narrowed. "And control that dog, or my men will." As the guard began dragging Ethan toward a construction trailer at the edge of the site, Scout followed, teeth bared, but holding back. Ethan's mind raced. He needed to alert someone, but his phone was in his pocket, still recording. Inside the sparsely furnished trailer, Montgomery dismissed the guard and closed the door, leaving Ethan alone with him and Victoria Winters. Scout positioned himself between Ethan and the adults, a low rumble still emanating from his throat. "Call off your dog," Montgomery ordered. "Scout, easy," Ethan said quietly. The dog relaxed slightly, but remained vigilant. Montgomery sat behind a makeshift desk, studying Ethan with cold calculation. "You're an intelligent young man, Ethan. That's clear from how you've handled yourself, but intelligence without wisdom can be dangerous." "Is threatening a minor your idea of wisdom?" Ethan asked. A tight smile crossed Montgomery's face. "I prefer to think of this as a negotiation. You have something I want: silence. And I have something you need: security for your future." He pulled out a checkbook. "Your grandmother's medical bills must be substantial. Parkinson's requires expensive treatments, doesn't it? And your college prospects, a mind like yours, shouldn't be wasted due to financial limitations." Victoria Winters placed a document on the desk. "We've prepared a simple agreement. You retract your allegations, state publicly that you misinterpreted what you saw, and we provide financial security for you and your grandmother." $1 million, Montgomery added, writing the figure casually. "Tax-free. Enough to care for your grandmother properly and fund your education at any university in the country." Ethan stared at the check, the amount more money than he could comprehend. "And what happens to Mrs. Jenkins? Or the watershed that your development would have contaminated? Or the families who lost their homes because of your schemes?" Montgomery waved his hand dismissively. "Not your concern. Life isn't fair, Ethan. Some people win, others lose. The sooner you accept that reality, the better off you'll be." Outside, the sounds of machinery continued as workers systematically erased evidence of the improper construction. Ethan's phone was still recording in his pocket, capturing every word. "What if I refuse?" he asked quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Montgomery's facade of reasonableness fell away. "Then things become unpleasant. Your grandmother might find herself facing eviction due to some overlooked property tax issues. Your dog might have an unfortunate accident, and you, a bright future, can so easily be derailed." He leaned forward. "I've been in Oak Ridge for generations, boy. I'll be here long after this little drama is forgotten. People have short memories when it comes to scandal, but they never forget who holds the purse strings." Victoria cleared her throat. "The offer expires when you leave this room, Ethan. Choose wisely." In the silence that followed, Scout suddenly lifted his head, ears perked toward the window. A moment later, Ethan heard it too. Sirens in the distance, growing louder. Montgomery heard them as well, his composure cracking momentarily. "What did you do?" he demanded. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, displaying the active recording. "I didn't need to do anything. My grandmother knew where I was going, and she knows exactly who to call if I'm not back on time." The color drained from Montgomery's face as he lunged for the phone. Scout reacted instantly, placing himself between Ethan and Montgomery, teeth bared in a serious warning. "You little—" Montgomery began, but was cut off as the trailer door burst open. Judge Peterson stood in the doorway, flanked by state police officers and Michael Ramirez, who had a camera pointed directly at the scene. "Harrison Montgomery," the lead officer announced, "you're under arrest for violation of a court order, witness intimidation, and destruction of evidence." As officers entered and began reading Miranda rights, Judge Peterson moved to Ethan's side. "Are you all right, son?" Ethan nodded, scratching Scout's ears to calm him. "I got it all on video, everything they're doing to the site, and Montgomery offering me money to drop the case." Ramirez grinned as he continued filming. "That's going to look fantastic on the front page. Local tycoon caught red-handed." Victoria Winters was already on her phone, likely calling the senior partners as the officers led a fuming Montgomery outside. Through the window, Ethan could see more police vehicles arriving, officers surrounding the construction workers and securing the site. Martha Miller pushed through the crowd, rushing to embrace her grandson. "When you didn't answer my text, I called Judge Peterson right away," she explained, holding him tightly. "I was so worried." "Smart move, Mrs. Miller," Judge Peterson said. "And even smarter of Ethan to get everything on video. That's going to be crucial evidence." As they exited the trailer, Ethan caught sight of Montgomery being placed in a police car, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled, his expression murderous as he spotted Ethan watching him. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of depositions, statements, and media attention. The story of how a 12-year-old boy and his dog had exposed decades of corruption spread far beyond Oak Ridge, attracting national news coverage. State investigators uncovered evidence of bribery, falsified documents, and environmental violations, spanning 3 decades. 1 month after the dramatic arrest at the construction site, Ethan sat in Judge Peterson's chambers with Laura Chen, reviewing the latest developments. The district attorney has reached a plea agreement with several of Montgomery's associates, Judge Peterson explained. They're turning state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges. "What about Montgomery himself?" Ethan asked. Laura smiled. "He's facing multiple federal charges now. The EPA got involved after your video showed deliberate destruction of protected wetlands. His assets have been frozen pending trial." Judge Peterson leaned back in his chair. "I've been on the bench for 20 years, and I've never seen a case quite like this. You've done something remarkable, Ethan." Outside the courthouse, Oak Ridge was experiencing a renaissance of sorts. With Montgomery's hold on the town broken, long-suppressed voices were being heard. A community meeting had been called to discuss the future of the disputed lands. Ethan arrived at the town hall with Scout and his grandmother to find the building packed beyond capacity. Mayor Thompson, newly elected after the previous mayor resigned in disgrace, waved them to reserved seats at the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began once everyone was settled, "we're here to discuss the reclamation of improperly acquired properties and the establishment of the Oak Ridge Community Land Trust." He gestured to a large map. "Thanks to the evidence provided by Ethan Miller and the testimony of Patricia Dawson and others, we've identified 48 properties that were obtained through fraudulent means over the past 30 years. A murmur ran through the crowd as people recognized their former homes and businesses. The State Attorney General has authorized the return of these properties to their rightful owners or their heirs, the mayor continued. For those properties where owners cannot be located, the land will be placed in a community trust for public benefit. Eleanor Jenkins raised her hand. "What about the watershed land? My Edward always said it was the crown jewel of Oak Ridge." The mayor smiled. "I'm pleased to announce that area will become the Edward Jenkins Nature Preserve, protecting our water supply and providing educational opportunities for generations to come." The room erupted in applause as the mayor raised his hand for silence. And none of this would have been possible without the extraordinary courage and persistence of one young man and his faithful companion. All eyes turned to Ethan, who blushed deeply as people rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Scout wagged his tail, clearly pleased with the attention, though not understanding its cause. Later that evening, as Ethan sat on his porch swing with Scout at his feet, Sarah Thompson, the librarian, stopped by with a special delivery. "This came for you today," she said, handing him a large envelope bearing the seal of the state governor's office. Inside was a formal letter of commendation and an invitation to a special ceremony in the state capitol. But more importantly, there was notification of a full academic scholarship to any state university upon his graduation. "They're calling you a hero," Sarah said softly. Ethan shook his head. "I just did what seemed right. Scout's the real hero. He found Mrs. Jenkins, and he kept me safe when Montgomery's guard caught us." As if understanding, Scout raised his head and licked Ethan's hand. Sarah smiled. "Heroes come in all forms. Ethan, sometimes they're brilliant 12-year-olds who see patterns others miss. Sometimes they're loyal dogs who sense when someone needs help." The following Sunday, the entire town gathered for the official dedication of the Edward Jenkins Nature Preserve. The formerly disputed construction site had been cleared of debris, and saplings had been planted to begin the restoration process. Patricia Dawson, now heading the Community Oversight Committee that would monitor future development in Oak Ridge, approached Ethan with a small wooden box. "This belonged to William Montgomery," she explained, opening it to reveal an antique pocket watch. "He always said it was his good luck charm, handed down through generations. Harrison kept it in his office as a symbol of the family legacy." She placed it in Ethan's hands. "The federal marshals found it when they seized the company assets. They thought you should have it, a reminder that time eventually runs out on injustice." As the ceremony concluded, Michael Ramirez pulled Ethan aside for one final question. "What's next for Oak Ridge's young hero?" Ethan considered for a moment, scratching Scout behind the ears. "I think I want to study environmental law and community. I'm planning. Maybe I can help other towns protect themselves from people like Montgomery." Ramirez nodded approvingly. The world needs more Ethans and fewer Montgomerys. In the months that followed, the changes in Oak Ridge were profound. Families returned to reclaim homes they had lost years before. The watershed began its slow, healing process under the watchful eyes of community volunteers. And Harrison Montgomery, once the most powerful man in 3 counties, awaited trial from a federal detention center, his empire crumbling around him. For Ethan, life gradually returned to a new normal. He still spent hours in the library, devouring books on increasingly diverse subjects. Scout still accompanied him everywhere, a constant companion and protector. And Martha Miller, her medical care now secured through a community healthcare initiative, watched her grandson with pride as he grew into his newfound confidence. 1 year to the day after the courthouse confrontation that started it all, Ethan and Scout visited the fully restored nature preserve. The area where Mrs. Jenkins had once fallen lay transformed. A beautiful observation deck now stood there, with educational displays explaining the importance of watershed protection. A bronze plaque caught Ethan's eye as they walked. The newly established trail, dedicated to Ethan Miller and Scout, who reminded us that courage knows no age, justice requires vigilance, and sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the quietest. Scout barked happily, as if approving the sentiment, and Ethan smiled. Together they continued down the path, guardians of a community reborn, symbols of what can happen when one boy and his dog decide to stand for what's right, no matter the odds against them. As the sun began to set over the hills of Oak Ridge, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ethan realized that some victories aren't measured in courtrooms or headlines, but in the quiet knowledge that doing the right thing, however difficult, is always worth the struggle. With Scout by his side and a community behind him, Ethan Miller had discovered his own power, not just his remarkable intellect, but the strength that comes from unwavering integrity and the courage to speak truth to power. In the end, it wasn't just a victory over corruption, but a testament to the profound difference that one determined soul, whatever their age, can make in the world. Dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by Ethan and Scout's powerful journey of courage and justice. To continue experiencing stories that inspire and captivate, we've prepared a special playlist of equally compelling narratives. Find it by clicking to your left. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities and celebrate the triumph of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. What was your favorite moment from Ethan's journey? Perhaps when Scout first led him to Mrs. Jenkins, or when the truth finally came to light in the courtroom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love connecting with you. Until our next adventure together, remember that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect.